Do the ends always justify the means? It's a particularly important question in a world where traditional values and concepts are being turned on their head by medical science and technology. It's a question that can be asked about many aspects of our lives. Our privacy has been reduced to enhance the war on terror. Our freedoms curtailed to delay the advance of the Wuhan flu. And yes, the data shows its mortality rate is about the same as a bad influenza season. But then there is the concept of medical ethics. Great advancements in medical technology often challenge our concept of right and wrong. It makes many ask, are the ends justified by the means? And this is particularly fraught where the concept of life is discussed. To some, life begins at conception, while others don't consider a baby self-aware and therefore worthy of protection until some time after birth. That's the Australian Greens co-founder and Princeton Professor of Bioethics Peter Singer's view of the world. Singer believes that humans are no different from animals, that a chimp could have a greater right to life than a human infant, and sometimes killing human babies is actually the right thing to do. It's all a bit inconsistent for a man who is a vegan because of his abhorrence of cruelty to animals. Anyway, we'll explore the weird world of Peter Singer another time. Tonight, I want to raise the concept of the three-person baby. You see, Parliament is set to have a conscience vote on allowing three-person baby IVF. And that's where some DNA from a donor is infused with the DNA of the mother and the father. And it all sounds rather creepy to me, but these sorts of developments are coming our way. And we were warned of them when embryonic experimentation was permitted by Parliament back in 2006. But for many, it isn't so clear-cut. The rationale for this latest change is to enable healthy babies to be born to women carrying deadly mitochondrial disease. At least 60 babies a year are born with a severe or a life-threatening form of this disease, and the new technology could be used to prevent that. It's been allowed in the UK since 2015, with the first babies born through the process in 2017. This is a very emotional and a deeply personal debate, which is why there is going to be a conscience vote on it. However, there are a number of concerns, not least of all. Will this technology really be limited to this particular application? History would suggest not. We've had assurance after assurance that the slippery slope argument is nonsense and that those that suggest it are really wearing their tinfoil hats. The problem is, those wearing those hats are often right. When abortion was legalised, all these years ago, it was under specific condition, where the mother's life was at risk and only available during the earliest stage of pregnancy. Now we have abortion on demand, even for full-term babies, or even for gender selection purposes. Now, the latter is a particular conundrum for lefties, because they tell us that gender is a personal decision. So how can they justify gender selective abortion? It just demonstrates the insanity of their logic. Or their lack of logic, I should say. Three-person babies opens up a brave new world of parenthood, and it may start with purely honourable intentions. But I ask, where could it lead? Joining me to discuss this is Liberal Senator Alex Antic. Senator, thank you for your time. You are a very brave man to come on, because lots of your colleagues, and including the Health Minister, have said, no, we don't want a bar of this. So thank you. I really do appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure, Cory. I think it's a vexed issue, and I think it's very normal for parents to want to give the best possible opportunity to a child to try and clear them of these diseases, and it's a terrible disease, we know that. Mitochondrial disease causes organ failure and all sorts of other things, premature death. But as you said, there are a range of really, really possible considerations that need to come up as part of this debate, if we have it. I mean, there isn't a bill up yet, but if and when there is, we'll look at it in more detail. But there are 4 people, at the very least, who get affected by this kind of decision. You've got the original donor of the egg and the mother with the potential condition, the father donating the sperm, and then you've got the rights of the unborn child as well, which is too often glossed over in this situation. You know, would this child ultimately have consented to this, and what does it mean for their genetic long-term future? That's just one of a range of really searching and difficult concepts that come out of this. And I think you're absolutely right to consider there should be caution. There are moral issues. Back to the old issues we've had before in stem cell research of the status of an embryo. That's a pretty basic one, but it's a pretty real one, all the way through to scientific ethical concerns, which really revolve around this slippery slope argument. And I think that's a very, very, very real and very concerning side to this whole debate.
Yeah, it's one of the particular challenges. You mentioned you haven't actually seen a bill yet, and yet the Prime Minister has given his imprimatur to this. He said he'll be supporting it. And I can understand that, because it's in an emotional sense to argue against it and to warn of or to caution what may be to come. It will be the subject of ridicule, as it always is, and the dismissal by others who say, no, you're worrying unnecessarily. But history does demonstrate that when we grant these concessions for emotive reasons or for, in altogether positive reasons, there are long-term consequences that often are not foreseen. Some of those consequences could be, Alex, legal too. Does the DNA donor, or do they have the potential to a liability or to be a part of the child's life? That's a very real question from my point of view. As a lawyer and a senator, how do you respond to that?
Look, I completely agree. And I think this is always the case. There will be an emotive argument, and it will be a very valid one, as we've said. It's a terrible condition and so on and so forth. But I think parliamentarians in particular have to really weigh up the gravity of some of these decisions. These scientific slippery slope arguments are pretty real. We don't want to see a situation, I think almost everybody agrees, we don't want to see a situation where people are selected, say, for genetic traits. Things like, sporting prowess. We don't want to be in a situation where people are selected for being elite athletes. That might be all right for you with your AIS background, but my history of amateur footy in the B grade for Pembroke Gold Scholars would have had me on the chopping block early. So, there are very real considerations that come with this. The one you raise about the abortion debate, I think, is probably the most telling. It was a Liberal Attorney General here in South Australia that first proposed the abortion legislation as it was back in the 60s, Robin Milhouse, as he was. And, at the time, he thought he was doing the right thing. And then 45 years later, he says to have carried that burden with him, saying that what he didn't anticipate that came from this legislation was the medical community and the legal community interpreting the legislation so broadly. He said, look, what we've now got is abortion on demand, and that's not what was first instituted. So the legal considerations are very real, and look, I think we need to be very, very, very careful with this kind of bill.
So talk us through then how this is going to work. A bill will clearly be introduced at some point. Who is introducing it, A? And B, will the time be devoted? Will this be rushed through the Parliament or put through as a priority? And where do you expect the respective conscience vote to end up?
Look, all very good questions. I certainly in relation to that last one, I couldn't tell you. I just don't know. And conscience votes are notoriously difficult to pick anyway, as you know well. But presumably it'll be introduced, I imagine, I don't know, as a private member's bill of some description, and there will be debate. Look, I think the other thing is whether or not, this is the right time to be doing this sort of stuff. I think we've got some pretty important matters to clear through, like the religious freedom bill, for example, which I'd be very keen to see brought back onto the table sooner rather than later. So I think we'll see how it pans out, but I think we need to be very careful with this one.
Well, actually, it's a very interesting point. This would be a very important bill for those with mitochondrial disease themselves, or the propensity to pass it on through their genes. They would think there's nothing more important than we should be done. But really, it's a very small issue in the scheme of what we're dealing with at a global and a national level. Why did then the Health Minister raise this in the party room this week? The reports are that he said it was going to be a conscience vote. Surely it must be more advanced than what you're suggesting to me.
Well, Cory, you know as well as I do that party room business is sacrosanct, but I have seen reports of this during the week. I've seen it reported quite widely in the media that, that this is coming before us. I don't know any of the answers to that, I have to say. I think we'll find out more as the weeks roll on through this parliamentary year. But look, we know the Senate has dealt with this in the previous Parliament. They dealt with it through, I think, the Community Affairs portfolio and put out a report which essentially recommended further consultation, which I imagine has done. So this is following a fairly predictable path to some sort of bill being introduced in the future, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it does raise these issues, though, of the ethical considerations around it, because a serious disease, 60 babies a year could be saved and given a wonderful life as a result. But there are so many other perhaps genetic conditions that could also be manipulated, and it could also be pursued down the path of designer babies, which I know would alarm many people, and they'll be on Twitter saying this is nonsense, but it's not too far beyond the realms of possibility if legislation like this is passed. Senator Alex Antic, I want to say thank you for your time tonight. You're a very courageous man to come on and talk about it. Welcome to Bernardi. I hope you won't be a stranger to this show for the year ahead.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Cory.